everybody. Are you ready for the last talk of the day? With a big mix of experiences and talks, I hope that you are ready for the last one for the day. We have two speakers, and we started this conference with going very small inside a person, looking inside the head, looking at the emotions and feelings and how they relate to creativity. And now we are going big. We are going to look at the creativity on the societal level, why it matters, and how it relates to the world we live in. And our two speakers today are first, Vlad Glaveanu, who is Associate Professor and Head of Department of Psychology and Counseling at Webster University in Geneva, Switzerland. He's also the Director of the Webster Center for Creativity and Innovation. And our second speaker will be Giovanni Corazza from University of Bologna. And he's a professor who has background in engineering, and he's the founder of the Marconi Institute of Creativity. So welcome to our speakers, and let's start.
Thank you. When I started this is where my Spanish ends, unfortunately. Thank you so much for being back here. I was thinking we're competing with some amazing weather, so I really appreciate you being here, and thank you for the invitation to talk at this event. So, as Orana mentioned, we're going back somehow to the big picture of society and creativity. This is something that I've dedicated the last 10 years kind of thinking about, and my question has often been, how does society and culture contribute to the creative process? How is society a part of creativity? A lot of people believe that, of course, we get inspired by others, we get inspired by society, and then we create on our own, perhaps in our mind, and then we go back to these others, we go back to society and present our work. And hopefully it's recognized, sometimes it's not, and it becomes very sad, but there is a lot of emotion involved, so there is a lot to study. But my question is, how does society participate? How do other people participate within the creative process? How are they part of our own creativity? So there has been a long kind of standing question for me, and more recently I started thinking about how does creativity participate to society? How can we put back and understand the creative process within society? And today I will talk a little bit about a new notion for me, which is the idea of the societies of the possible. So before that, I realized that we're within an art foundation and museum, so I will have a lot of images, a lot of art at times. My proposition to you is to think about society and communal living as a kind of creative achievement. Can we do that? So we know a lot about creativity in the arts, and the foundation here, of course, contributed a lot to our knowledge of that area. Creativity in design, creativity in science and discovery and so on. But what about creativity within society? Can we think of society, of living together, as a kind of creative achievement? What would that involve? The fact that we can collaborate, we can work with each other, we can come up with amazing things collectively, is a form of creativity. Maintaining society and communal living and changing society, my argument would be, are forms of creativity. But of course, and I have to put this up in order for you not to think that I'm coming from this very la-la land kind of perspective on society and thinking that everything that happens in society is creative, is going towards the better, and so on. We know it doesn't, actually. And we know there are many challenges we're confronted with individually and collectively in terms of understanding others, welcoming migration and otherness and difference, in terms of the raising wave of populism and nationalism we see all around, and in terms of the big crisis that was mentioned in a question the evening before. What do we do about the planet, the state of the planet? Of course, there is a lot of creativity required to address all of these issues, and in the middle of all of them, we have some very interesting signs when it comes to creative activism, when it comes to the art of protest in many ways. This is one of my favorite ones there, Deny Trump, Not Climate. Here we have the famous baby blimps that keep on appearing. This one is Boris Johnson, I think. And here we have a context that is closer to home. I'm from Romania originally, and this is one of the biggest protests that happened in Romania after the fall of communism, where people protested against just legalizing or normalizing corruption in the country. So there are many ways in which people come together to create through humor, through improvisation, new ways, new visions of society, and trying to enact them. Now, before we go into what is specific for that creativity, I think we should take a moment and think about what we heard through these 2 days. And of course, we heard about the definition of creativity. We know now about novelty and originality and value or appropriateness or meaningfulness, which is a term I actually prefer. And also about different personal qualities that can help people be more creative. So divergent thinking came up, risk-taking in many ways came up, tolerance is another big one. What these concepts do, and I think it's very important for us to be aware of that, is turn our attention back to the creative product, the features of the creative product, novelty, originality, and so on, or the features of the creative person. But of course, the story of creativity does not stop there. And it includes the process that we are actually talking about most of the time, but also the context of creativity. Now, I come from a branch of psychology called sociocultural psychology, and I'm particularly interested in what kind of happens in the middle between these people there. I'm looking at creativity as not necessarily an intra-psychological process, but something that happens in between people. Something that happens in interaction, in collaboration. According to my view of creativity, and we can discuss, and hopefully we'll have some time to do it at the end, every creation is actually a form of co-creation, because we always engage with the knowledge and perspective of other people as we create. So it is a deeply kind of contextual and relational view of creativity, and in order, I would say, for us to be able to capture this perspective or this approach, we would need to think perhaps in new terms. We would need to expand our vocabulary of creativity. Now, what I'm proposing here, these are my favorite concepts. I'm sure all of you have your own favorite concepts that you use in practice as well. By promoting these, I'm not saying we should forget about novelty, originality. They're very important in their own right. But what I'm proposing is to rethink them within a broader framework that takes context into account and process, obviously. So very shortly, because my topic goes back to society, but just to give you an idea of what is my understanding of creativity, for me creativity begins with a difference. Differences of position, differences of perspective, differences of opinion are actually the fuel of creativity. If we all started from a conception of the world that is identical, there would be no reason to create. There would be no reason to communicate, actually. There is no novelty, no emergence, if there is no difference. So I think that's already an important point to make. Differences of position, right? We all occupy different positions in the world. If you look at the way we are just now, I'm standing here on the podium, you're standing over there, and we develop different perspectives on the same situation. I see the room in a certain way, you see it in a different way. And even for colleagues who sit close by to you, they also have a different visual perspective on what's happening in the room. What happens when we put these perspectives together? What happens when we share them and talk about them? Of course, the notion of perspective, which is very important for me, has different levels. You can have a physical, visual perspective, and that's very important at times to realize new things in the situation, but you can also have a symbolic or conceptual perspective. For instance, in debates about democracy, imagine what does it mean to approach it from a left-wing or a right-wing position, for instance. You would have a very different conceptual perspective coming to it. And finally, at the core of the creative process for me is the idea of dialogue. Putting perspectives in relation to each other. The moment we encounter the perspective of the other, we not only have a different point of view, but we also have an opportunity to look at our own perspective, our own understanding from the position of this other person. And in many ways, for me, that's what the creative process does. It confronts us with these novel new perspectives that make us reflect on ourselves and on what we produce, what we make. And that's how creativity becomes very much, at least for me, about possibility, about expanding human possibility, expanding the ways in which we look at ourselves and we look at society and the world around. So, armed with this understanding, let's take a few examples of how perspectives are fundamental for creativity. So this is obviously the bull of Picasso, and the story goes, at least read on the internet, that's my source, that looking through, or seeing a bike, different components of a bike, and seeing this handle kind of near the seat of the bike, Picasso had this view, this vision of that is a bull's head. Right? In a way, people would say you had to be Picasso in many ways to have his position, his long-standing interest in this metaphor, this image of the bull, to be able to see that. But his perspective helped him bring these two objects together and propose this to us as a creation that has a specific meaning. Then if you think about, okay, we go away from the arts, we think about Airbnb, we each have a home, right? We go back to, and we think that's very different from a hotel. But there were some people who thought, actually, your home could be a hotel. How would that work, right? So applying a new perspective on the notion or on the idea of being at home led to these kind of companies. And finally, just to make us aware that, of course, it's not only Picasso, it's not only, big companies, it is everyday life. Every time we encounter the world, we have the possibility of applying a new perspective on it. And if you think about children's play and where everything begins, because it does begin with pretend play in childhood, you see how children interact with different objects and start applying new perspectives to them. From these very kind of unassuming, set of wooden blocks, they can create almost anything because they develop new perspectives to look at the piece of wood, right? It can become a submarine, it can become even a person, and it is applying this kind of imagination that drives their creativity. So to summarize a little bit my argument about creativity and society. As I said, we have extensive work on creativity in art, in music, in design, in science and play. But what if we were to think of society as a domain of creativity? What would be particular to that form of creativity? And how would that creativity contribute to changing society? And my basic assumption is that we would learn a lot both about creativity and about society if we were to consider them together rather than separate. So taking just very briefly a few examples, one of the basic ways in which we're creative in society with each other takes the form of sociability. This element of improvisation in interacting with others, this element of humor and play that was theorized by George Simmel and others in the form of sociability. Human interactions are not only about utilitarian purposes, they're also about this extra element of curiosity and playfulness around the other that actually drives us towards other people and makes our social life rich. Then another element we could think about is social innovation, right? There's a lot of work done on social innovation. Obviously, this is a big literature, a big area of its own. How people create services and products and ideas that can be useful for others, that don't necessarily, they're not made for profit. So here is an example of an NGO that proposed volunteering services whereby you don't become a volunteer, but you simply offer one time a service or a type of help that you can offer, and then you can just completely, let go. You can become a volunteer for a very specific task. So help with it is an example of that. And then we can move on to like big C-level creativity. And Gandhi was mentioned by Howard Gardner, who talked about different types of intelligence as a big example, a big C example of interpersonal creativity, because he knew how to talk to people and bring them together in creating, satyagraha, the method of non-violent protest. He could change society through the power of his personality in many ways. And we can have many other examples. Perhaps Greta and her work today could qualify as this. And this brings me to activism and artivism, especially artivism. This is one of the best images I've seen of that. This is the US-Mexico border, the infamous wall, and that is a Mexican child kind of peering through to the other side. What does it take to make successful activism? What it takes is to offer people across a divide, like a border wall, a perspective of what it is to live or to be on the other side, what it is to be a human being, that occupies a different position than yours in the world, and how would engagement be with that real, actual human being. And if we think about that and expand it a little bit to protest and how people protest, this is one method that I particularly find absolutely amazing. I think this picture was taken in a protest in Kiev, and I know it was applied as a method in Serbia and other places. So protesters in this example hold mirrors, not flowers, not pancards with stuff, mirrors as they approach the policemen or the authorities. So what does this technique do? As you can see here, it shows the other the way I see you, which is something that often escapes us in social interactions. We don't fully try to or manage to grasp the perspective of the other, right? So this way of doing protest, this kind of form of social activism, invites you to enter my perspective, and by doing so, to gain some kind of creativity and knowledge about my view of the world. So it's in many ways a better basis to build and transform society. So, close to conclusion, because I realize I'm almost over time. Creativity is a future-oriented process. It opens up possibility, both in our individual lives and our collective lives. And our societies, even if we often think about them as antithetical to creativity, because they're very normative, they're very institutionalized, they always offer us spaces of possibility. They're always, at the same time, societies of the possible. And one of the key questions I think we should ask ourselves as a community of educators, psychologists, artists, and so on, is how can we contribute through creativity to expanding this possibility within our societies? What can be our role in this process? Because, let's face it, we all face a bit of a crisis of imagination somehow when it comes to society. This is one of the beautiful memes that I think during the flood in Venice came up. It is easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. It is hard to build and believe and be passionate, speaking of passion, of new perspectives that go beyond capitalism, neoliberalism, austerity. Is another society, is another form of being in the world possible? And I know I said I'm going to end, but I'm just going to end with one last point. Often, what happens out of all of this creativity that is involved in protest and revolution? We had so many examples with the Occupy movement, with the different kind of Arab Springs, with the Romanian protests. Did anything happen at the end? Why many of them fail, or supposedly fail? Harabai had a very interesting point. He said that it's because we all enjoy these different perspectives, and these draw us towards protest and towards all these movements, but at the end of the day, we cannot come up with a more concrete perspective that can actually deliver the change. We disperse a lot and we don't converge enough. And I think that's an interesting lesson that we can take from creativity research. As you heard in the days before, creativity involves divergence, but it also involves convergence. How can we build consensus, building on and recognizing the difference between people? This is something that could deliver change. Because these kind of springs, even if they fail in the short term, they all matter. They're very risky endeavors when people go protest, especially in certain areas of the world. And yet I think it's a mistake to think of them only in terms of, did they topple the government, did they create immediate change? Their power and the power to think and change society is actually a long-term prospect. And what it does is basically to change us, to change the way we imagine and think about what is doable, what is thinkable within our society. That is the way to build societies of the possible. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vlad. Excellent speech as always. Always a pleasure to be on the stage with you. So if we can have my presentation up. First thing I want to do is to thank the organizers. Thanks to Fondazione Botin for having us here. And I want to say that would like to return this invitation because we have another Fondazione in Italy, which is dedicated to Guglielmo Marconi. So we have these two foundations working on creativity in the arts and in the history of science and technology, and wouldn't it be wonderful for us to collaborate? So as Zorana said when she introduced me, I'm an engineer working also on creativity, so kind of a strange mix. Let's see how that makes sense. But first of all, I want you to close your eyes, think back at the past millennium, 20 years ago. How was life? How did we work back then? How did we collaborate and talk to each other? What was different? And think of what we do today, the way that we collaborate, work together. What has changed? Who wants to tell me what is the most important change or the most unexpected thing that happened in these 20 years? Smartphone, immediateness, yes, all these things. So when we think about what has changed, our mind goes to technology. And so I take part of the blame for that, because I'm an engineer, telecommunication engineer. But normally you don't associate creativity with technology and engineering, even though we all recognize that what has changed in our life depends on technology. So clearly, as James said a couple of times yesterday, creativity is horizontal and can be applied to any domain. And the question is, can we extract principles from the different domains and try to see what is common and what we can learn from one discipline to the other, and maybe we can draw inspirations for that. Now, this progress in technology comes from a core, and the core is our computing capacity in devices, which are miniaturized, of course, and this capacity has grown exponentially. So if the trend goes on, what will happen in about 10, 15 years is that the devices like laptop computers will have the capacity of computation of a human brain in 10, 15 years. And in 25 years, the same computer, same price, will have the capacity of computation of the entire human species in one laptop. And we will all have one, like you do right now. And you add a little bit of expert systems, ability to learn, machine learn. It's clear that the problem for us is, how do we control these machines? Because we want to control them, not to be controlled. And you might say, well, I don't like this world, I don't feel at ease, it's too fast, and this exponential growth is not normal. What I want to say with the next slide is that this is actually very normal. This is the story of our progress since the very beginning. These exponential curves that you see are counts of numbers of products in all disciplines, philosophy, genetics, biology, anything from the Middle Ages, 1200, to today, and they're all exponential. But if you look at the bottom left, that's from 2.1 millions back, prehistoric times, to 0, and that's the growth of the first creative industry in our story, which is the stone tool industry. Exponential growth in prehistoric times. So exponential growth of culture is not due to the new technologies, is intrinsic in what we do. And it comes from the fact that when we create, we take knowledge from the past and we recombine it. And for those of you who remember when you studied calculus, if you take n elements and you recombine them, you have n factorial possibilities, which is the only function which is faster than the exponential. We have this exponential potential of growth of culture, and we have always exploited that. Okay, but let's talk about the modern times, not prehistoric times, even though they are interesting, to understand or to give an answer to a question that was resonating yesterday. Why do we need creativity? Okay, so it's important, it makes us grow, but why do we need it? Is it really so desirable? So first of all, starting from the industrial society, if you were to describe the world in we live in two words: standards, producing things which are always the same, and everybody we all buy the same things, which are producing larger quantities than the need. So then we have Black Fridays and discounts, because you have to do something with this stuff, of course. So massification of taste, we all like the same things. Advertisement, we are convinced to buy. Standardization, number one. And the second thing is we structure space and time. We concentrate our energies and resources in cities. In 2050, we will be 10 billions, and 75% of these 10 billions will be living in cities. So this movement from the country to the cities is not over, keeps going. And we synchronize our lives, so we create traffic jams, and we all do the same things at the same time. In this society, we design our school system. If standards are the most important thing of all, we need to know the standards. Knowledge, expertise, know-how at the top of your CV, of course. And you specialize deeper and deeper into a small field. The more you're specialized, the better. A few people do not conform, and a small subset of those who do not conform do something, produce ideas that change the course of arts, science, and technology. We call them geniuses. So that's where we come from. But now, again, I take part of the blame. Information and communication technology comes in, and we reverse society upside down. It's a revolution. It's not evolution, it's a revolution. In place of standardization, we have personalization. User profiling, user-driven design, personal communications. You don't call a room, you call a person. And if the person does not answer, the other person will be offended. So she has to answer. You cannot leave it, you know? It's important. It's necessary. It's personal. Personalization to the single user. Thank you very much for that. You know, that was not prepared, I have to say. And space and time are destructured. So we are here together, but if you have your smartphone in your hand, you might be talking to other places in Spain or in the rest of the world, and you might be accessing the databases that are distributed across the globe. Half of the world is connected, the other half is not. Big social problem, of course. But in the half which is connected, we have access to all information which is over the internet. We all have access to all information in no time. Any knowledge gap is filled today in a time which is orders of magnitude smaller than it used to be only 20 years ago. It's a trend. In the future, we tend to share information. It's a commodity. We all have energy. We all have information. It's a commodity. Should we teach the same things if information is a commodity? Well, expertise is still important. I'm not saying that school and university should not teach, because without expertise, without knowledge, you receive a notion of information, you don't know what to do with it. Part of it is relevant, part of it is not relevant. Part of it is true, and part of it are fake news. You need to have ideas, you need to have principles, you need to have certainties to filter. But it's a totally different use of knowledge. In the industrial society and before the industrial society, that was my definition as a human being. I know this. I am an engineer. That's what I know. That's what I am. Here I'm saying it's a totally different purpose. You filter information. But then what do you do with that? Are you flexible enough in your mind to take advantage of all these opportunities that we now have? Can we teach children to be flexible so they don't specialize in a single discipline, but they're able, to exploit all of it? And most important for Botin and for us here, if we all share information, what makes a difference between us is what we generate out of a common layer of shared information. That's the only thing that is not on the internet yet, because it's out of our mind. It's original. Originality is a necessity, not a luxury anymore. And that's why it has to become, creativity must become a discipline. Another phone is ringing, so we could even make it, mute the phone. That's a possibility. We could have creativity, must have creativity as a discipline that we teach and develop for everybody. Necessity for dignity. There's a third box, it's not over yet. Post-information society, or if you're tired and a little pessimist right now, post-human society. So these hyper levels of intelligence that I was talking about, hyper levels of connectivity, all objects interconnected, so we all live in one brain, essentially. We are all part of one brain. What is our role? We already know today that better than the single artificial intelligent agent, and unfortunately better than the single human brain, is the collaboration between the two. And if you have a smartphone or an iPad or a laptop in your hands, we are already extended by technology. These are parts of ourselves, parts of our mind. Our mind is extended by technology. And so what I'm saying is that in the future there will be even more a collaboration between man and machine. What do we give to that collaboration? What is our role? I'm an engineer. I cannot talk bad about technical, notions and algorithmic computational thinking. But the fact is that whatever can be defined by algorithms, whatever is repetitive, whatever can be carried out through long efforts and repetitive efforts will be done very, very efficiently by machines that do not strike, do not complain. Maybe right now they don't complain. Our role will be to bring in the human quality. So that's what we need to develop. That's why we are here. That's why the Fondazione Bottini is so important. The human quality, our ability to look at each other and understand each other just by looking into our eyes. Our ability to imagine the future. Our ability to generate ideas which are surprising, novel, original, authentic, our creativity in the world. So creativity is what we give in this human-machine collaboration, and that is why it's not only now important for our dignity, but that's what we do. We generate ideas that are transformed into entrepreneurial endeavors with business models that will decrease their span. Now it's months, it will become weeks, so we all become serial entrepreneurs, and we give our ideas to machines that carry them out, and we have a new constitution clause which says that artificial labor is a right for everyone. So we need to reform a little bit our constitutions. If this is true, and you might not believe it's true, but if it is, suppose it is, then creativity is not only a matter of dignity, but it's a matter of survival. And you say, Giovanni, well, this is too far away. We don't believe you. Let's talk about today. So let's talk about today. This is a report from 2015. It's an old report right now, but it's one of the many that you can find on the evolution of the job market. And what you find in this report is matrices like this. In the abscissa, you have probability of computerization. Probability that a task, a job description, will be carried out by machines in the near future, from 0 to 1. In the ordinates, you have probability of creativity. What is the probability that in that task, in that job description, you need to use your creative abilities, 0 to 1. At the crossing of the two dimensions, you have squares of red color. The darker the red, the more the millions of jobs that shift from humans to machines. And the message is very clear. Today, not in 2050, low creativity in your job, high probability that in the near future that job will be performed by a machine. It's not a necessity, it's not a luxury, it's a necessity. What the Fondazione Bottini is doing here is not a complement to our life, it's a central mission, and we all share that responsibility. So that's why we founded this Marconi Institute for Creativity. We do research, education at university, a little bit in schools, a little bit in business schools, and application in industries. So you extract methodologies and you apply them to innovate on products and services, product portfolios. So if you don't want to listen to me anymore, you're bored to death, just bring one message home. Creativity is not a luxury, and this is why it's important to teach it, promote it, understand it. It's a necessity for our survival as a human species. Now, we said yesterday there was a question to Oshin, I think. Is Oshin here? Yes. What is the role of genetics in creativity? Of course there is a role, because that's our starting point. But let's think of one fact. When we are born, all of our organs are complete, and they function in the same way that they will do when we become adult, except for one, which is our brain. The only organ which is not complete when we are born is the brain. Because when we are born, the brain is super rich in neurons and super poor in connections, in synapses. The synapses are formed in the first 2 years of age, and at 2 years of age, your toddlers can interconnect anything. That's the peak of our connectivity, and Oshin could tell you how important connectivity is in the brain. These large-scale structures that he was talking about yesterday function, perform better and better the larger the connectivity between distant areas in the brain. So connectivity is super important. At 2 years old, we are super connected. Then we prune away the connections. Only the ones that are used, only the ones that are confirmed by experience remain, and the other ones are lost forever. Which means that our brain is developed in a biocultural way, or epigenetic way, if you want. So culture comes in even inside the brain to determine our characteristics even for the future of the rest of our lives. And as we become sharper and sharper, we only use certain connections, certain synapses. These become more isolated through myelin and faster. So we become more intelligent. We go faster to the correct answers. So now I would like the translation to stop, because you have to read in English, everyone. So read with me, okay? So you're ready for this. No translation. Without a doubt, our brain is extremely fast and efficient in reading sentences in which several spelling errors appear. This ability relies on the fact that we can grasp meaning by projecting on our knowledge, avoiding to spend time on unnecessary details. Fantastic. Fantastic. We all can do that. It's not even our language. And we all can do that. Why? How can we do that? Because we don't read, as the text says, we don't read letter by letter. We extract meaning by integrating all the perceived inputs and projecting these inputs on what we already know and what we expect and what the context tells us. It's fantastic. It's great. It's fast. It's brilliant. It's energy saving. But what is the but? These words do not exist, but we recognize them for something we already know, which means that we are blind to novelty. We interpret everything based on what we already know. We are only able to see what we are expecting to see. Sometimes you get something which is more ambiguous. What if a new eggnog should appear? What is this eggnog? We don't know. So we refer to the context. What if a new eggnog? Well, where are we here? In heaven. So what if an angel should appear? But if we are in Berlin, what if a new angle should appear? So when something from the world comes to us and it's ambiguous, we don't know how to solve that, we refer to the context, we give one interpretation, which is one of the possible, but there are multiple interpretations to life, and then we believe it's true. And then the conflict starts, because other peoples have different options. So what I'm saying is that we are trained naturally towards fast and brilliant decisions, answers, but creativity, as we said a few times in these 2 days, requires to slow down, and instead of giving one answer, it requires you to see alternatives, different points of view, diverge, and achieve originality and effectiveness. Now this is the standard, so-called standard definition, 2 things: originality, which means novelty, surprise, authenticity; effectiveness, which depends on the domain. So if it's arts, it will be aesthetic, like Pablo told us yesterday. If it's technology, it might be efficiency. This is the standard definition, and you've seen it many times over, and you're yawning right now on me. So what I want to do is go against this definition and see if it's possible to have creativity without originality and without effectiveness. What do you think? Can we violate the standard definition of creativity and be creative, but see no originality, no effectiveness? Think of what's on the other side of the building, Calder. How many of the parts of those exhibits have been produced and actually won the context for which they were designed? Very few. Most of them not realized. Think of Van Gogh He only painted for about 13, 15 years, hundreds and hundreds of fantastic paintings. How many did he sell during his lifetime? One. Think of Hertz. Heinrich Hertz is the first one in the world to prove that Maxwell was right. The electromagnetic field can propagate even in void. And what he says is fantastic. There is no application. What is in common to all of these stories? That to recognize the value, the originality, the novelty, the effectiveness is not easy when we're in front of something which is truly new, truly departing from the state of the art. And so to require the recognition of originality and effectiveness, it's only a small part of this process. Most of the time we don't recognize it, and still we are creative. It would be like saying soccer is scoring a goal. That's the aim. We want to score, but soccer is much more. It's a game, also defense, training, and so on. So this is a definition of creative achievement, not of creativity. This is what we aim for. If you want to define the overall process, you need to introduce another word, which is potential. You're very creative if you're creating the conditions to maybe achieve. You're searching, you're producing, you're trying, you're failing, but you're resisting to frustration. You have a high potential for originality and effectiveness. This is describing the process. And sometimes we achieve that, and we have a creative achievement. Sometimes we don't, and we are in so-called creative inconclusiveness. So, in order to estimate the value of something which is truly original, we need to follow Vlad's advice and take on all possible perspectives. And go along with the pragmatist maxim which says, what is an entity? How do we define an entity? We have to imagine all the possible cloud of all possible meanings, functions, attributes, implications, inferences, which have practical bearing on reality, and this cloud is the entity. In order to understand something, and understand something new, original, we need to imagine all possible uses, all possible functions, in all possible scenarios. Nobody can do that. Nobody can be so arrogant to say, I can judge this product. I am the judge. Nobody can do that. You always only see a small part of reality. So it's an exercise of future studies. There are many possible futures, and to understand the value of something which is new is an exercise of imagining possible futures. And the more you're able to diverge, the more you're able to give a good, sound, round judgment of an idea. Once we recognize that the estimation never ends because there are infinite possible perspectives, estimation never ends. And my result can become the input of somebody else's exercise. So all these creativity episodes are concatenated to infinity. And also we have exaptation, which you might have heard or maybe not, because it's parallel to adaptation by Darwin. Not all new functions in living organisms are born by adaptation, by changing the DNA and finding that that new DNA is more fit to the environment. That's only a small part. Most of the novelties in living organisms come from exaptation, which means to find new functions for the same DNA, for the same organism, for the same features. Which means find a new perspective in biological organisms. Now, all these episodes are interconnected and it never ends. And if you want to go to the origin, you don't find it. You have to go back to the start of our universe. Because you can find creativity out of humans. You can find creativity out of life. You can find creativity also in matter. If you have read Prigogine, Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1977, he was the first one to study complex systems which are kept far away from equilibrium by energy, and they can have trajectories which are unpredictable and therefore surprising, original, and surely effective. So this union, ensemble of all possible creativity episodes becomes one, single, dynamic, universal process to which we contribute. We are part of that. We contribute with our own creativity episodes, and something that we do today might change our assessment of something that happened 30 or maybe 300 years ago. I want to end by saying that part of our exercise is also to feel better in the society of today and the future. We call this concept of creativity for well-being organic creativity, which goes back to the balance that Oshin was telling you about yesterday between the two large-scale networks which are most important in creativity performance, so the default mode network for imagination, the executive control network for metacognition and control. When you have this balance, which is within a certain boundary, which is time variant depending on where you are in the process, you feel well. You feel well, but you are productive. So we're not talking about guaranteed salary. We're not talking about relaxation. We're talking about a happy people producing ideas that become products in the end. Thank you very much for your attention. A little one. Okay. Fatima. Okay.
I have a question, Giovanni. Can you come every month
Tengo
here
una
to say
pregunta.
that
Que,
creativity
Giovanni,
is
¿puedes venir
just a
todos los meses
survival
para
matter?
decir que la creatividad de la creatividad depende de nuestra supervivencia? Te vamos a contratar para que vengas a decirlo todos los meses.
Bueno, pues muchísimas gracias.
Well, thank you.
Love it. So.
Okay. So you may.
So the answer to this question is people, unfortunately, I'm an engineer, but I have to say, unfortunately, people are working on artificial creators. So we have artificial writers, artificial painters. You might have seen the Rembrandt painting that Rembrandt never painted. Have you seen that? That was produced by Microsoft by taking models of all paintings by Rembrandt and reproducing exactly the style on a figure that Rembrandt never painted. So it's not a fake, it's not a true painting by Rembrandt, it's something in between. Again, what artificial intelligence can do is produce many combinations, but only us can decide what to do and extract the value imagining the future. So artificial intelligence can be part of the process, the idea generation process, but not of the estimation part and not of the drive, the decision to be creative in a certain area. So humans will be essential forever. I believe that.
Vlad?
We survive, we survive.
The same question on artificial intelligence?
No. We go for the next one.
Okay.
Vamos a
¿Crees
pasar
que
a la
los
siguiente pregunta.
políticos de hoy en día
Do you think that politicians
deberían hacer
today
un máster en
should
creatividad
take a master in creativity,
para
study
aprender
a
a
master in
dialogar,
creativity to be
aceptar
able
distintas
to
perspectivas,
have a
etcétera?
dialogue and accept different points of view?
Question. I do think that the way politics is done has been transformed. I'm not an expert in politics, but I do believe that the way these positions that I've been talking about and perspectives become entrenched and actually they don't talk to each other, they talk past each other. It's reflected at the political level. It's a lot reflected within social media, within these information bubbles that people participate in. So I think what we need to recover really is the real meaning of dialogue. What does it mean to be in dialogue? It's not only to speak to someone, but to be ready to understand that someone and to understand yourself as seen by this other person. I think not only politicians, but more generally across the board in education, people would benefit enormously from opening themselves to the ideas and perspectives of others. So yes, maybe they should do that. They should come to the foundation, all these politicians.
Es la segunda vez el martes
It's
fue la
the
primera,
second time,
lunes, estoy perdida,
Tuesday,
el miércoles, el jueves,
it's Wednesday,
el jueves.
Thursday,
Martes y jueves
on
ya nos
Tuesday
han
and
hecho la
Wednesday,
propuesta de que vinieran
we have
aquí los
received a
políticos,
proposal to have some
los
politicians,
españoles,
Spanish
Los
politicians,
extranjeros, ¿no?
not foreign politicians.
Estaríamos
Bueno,
encantados.
hay que empezar en algún sitio.
Encantados. Para Giovanni, por favor.
Giovanni,
Con la
the question is for Giovanni.
de presente y futuro
With
que
the
ha dibujado,
projection of present and future that you have shown,
¿Qué tipo de formación,
What
disciplinas,
type
carreras
of
recomendaría a un supuesto
training
hijo suyo?
disciplines would you recommend to a son or daughter of yours?
Giovanni, un hijo de 16 años.
Do you have a 16-year-old daughter or son?
Okay, so-
What would you recommend?
So education, we've been talking about that in the 2 days, and there are different approaches. To simplify, I would say, horizontal approach, you try to insert creativity in all subjects, or vertical approach, you treat creativity as a separate discipline. And I am in favor of the second option, and I'll tell you why. Because expertise, even in the future, today and in the future, is still essential. You need to have dominant ideas. You need to be fast and brilliant 99% of your time. You cannot be creative all of the time. You wouldn't be able to dress. You wouldn't be able to eat, because there are so many infinite alternatives for everything. So you have to reserve 1% of your resources to creativity, and make sure that you have strong knowledge in the disciplines that you need, and exploit the technology. But then separate. You understand creativity, you understand the process, you understand the models, you develop your talents, because there are talents, of course. You develop your abilities, and then you're able to use them in all disciplines. But clarity of education is important.
Vlad? Something
Same
to add?
question.
Anything to add? You want to add
well,
something?
I have to say, but it's such a long discussion that Giovanni said that he would see creativity as taught a bit separately, right, as a discipline. I tend to think a bit the other way, but I do take your point, Giovanni. I do believe that there is if you think from a social, cultural perspective, the role of modeling and offering models to people, I think we cannot just talk about creativity and preach it without trying to embody it somehow. And of course, in the way we are creative, we're responsible for our own products and outcomes and ideas and the ones of others. So I think I would go for a combined approach, but I think we can reach agreement, I'm pretty sure.
No, I'm sure. What Vlad is saying, in every subject you can be creative and present alternatives and not a single dogma.
Right, exactly.
Which I agree with. But still, you need to have certainties in math, in physics, in chemistry, and whatever. And plus be able to challenge everything else.
Right.
Not mixing the two, because I think that would make some confusion in the mind of our 10-years-old hijo.
Hijo.
¿Cómo podemos ser creativos en sociedad
How can
para
we
generar
be
un cambio
creative
real?
in society to generate a real change?
Isn't that $1 question, right? I mean, if we knew that, we wouldn't be here, we would be there changing society, and we kind of are. I think I'm going to go back a little bit to that idea of divergence and convergence, which is something that came up previously, the fact that creativity involves these cyclical and sometimes paradoxical processes, right? I started by saying personally that difference is very important for creativity. If we are not aware of and miss differences, we miss opportunities to develop new perspectives and understand the world differently. But there is another story to that, which is the idea of similarity and consensus and building consensus. And I think one of the big things that separate a less successful from a more successful social movement is the ability to accommodate both differences in the way perspectives come about and are expressed, and to manage building consensus. I think that's one of the key points.
So I agree with Vlad, and I add one thing. I'm going to say something which is very simple and impossible to understand at the same time. In order to become more creative at societal level, we need to accept, to introduce in our thinking process elements which find justification only a posteriori. Impossible to understand. Only a posteriori and not a priori. So if you find justification a posteriori, that means you're interpreting, extracting value from a state of mind that you never visited before. And then you have a chance to be original. So suppose you come to Fundación Botín every day, and you wake up, you're a little, still sleepy, and you always take the same route, the shortest one, so you save energy, save time. Sometimes you have to change your route because there's a traffic jam or some road work, but you still take smallest possible deviation. But then tonight, Fatima goes home, she gets kidnapped and taken out of Santander in a place where Fatima has never been. The kidnappers run away because the police comes. So tomorrow morning, Fatima wakes up. She's somewhere she's never been before, and she still wants to come to Fundación Botín because commitment is everything. She tries different routes, and it will take much longer to come. And in the end, she manages, because it's Fatima, you know? She manages. What is the chance now that the route that she has found is new, original? It's one. It's certain. So if you're able to create a state of mind where you've never been before, and maybe nobody else in the human species have been before, and a posteriori you're able to reconduct this to the state of the art, which means interpret and give meaning, meaningfulness, then you're generating originality.
We should probably say we're not going to do that to Fatima.
No.
Yes. Yeah.
No.
Marina, just in case. Okay. It's in English, so if you want to look at it, it's about your neurons.
Habéis dicho que empezamos a perder neuronas y conexiones desde los 2 años, pero podemos entrenar el cerebro para generar nuevas
we lose part of the
conexiones.
connections, the ones that we don't use, and we make the ones that we do use much stronger, and then our brain reaches a maturity level depending on also the disciplines at an age which is 15 to 19 years old, and maintains very extremely good performance up until 150, 170 years. So no problem there. No, I'm kidding, of course. Then there is some degradation at the end of life, but plasticity is preserved up until very late in our life. So if we keep challenging ourselves and keep learning new things and looking for alternatives, yes, we can build new connections even very far away, very far away from childhood, and our plasticity goes on for a long time. Of course, areas are now differentiated, they have different roles, lateralization happens, so it's not as flexible as we were when we were 2 years old. And of course, Vlad is an 8 months old, and he knows how flexible she is.
Very.
And she can challenge all of your ways of living in a very flexible way.
Ok, vamos a hacer la última. La inteligencia
This is the
artificial
last
del
one.
futuro no siente.
Artificial intelligence of the future doesn't feel.
Por tanto, ¿cómo será compatible
Therefore,
esto con la inteligencia emocional y la
How is
creatividad?
it going to be compatible with creativity and emotional intelligence?
Question, and well, first of all, once we understand, model emotions, the question is it really true that we cannot introduce part of that inside a machine behavior? I have to say that at the World Economic Forum, that has been mentioned a few times here, there were demonstrations of an artificial psychologist, and many people, many famous politicians and also scientists talked to this lady, artificial lady, and she looks at you and she behaves in a way that in a sense resonates with what you're doing. So she looks at your face, understands your mood, and resonates with your mood, and people feel that she is understanding me. This is not true. It's artificial. But it's difficult to find the border, okay? So the world is becoming more complex, and flexibility is entering into the circuits, so circuits that will not only be solid state, but will be inside our tissues and so on. So we really need to be very much aware of all of these developments and still believe that we are unique. So I agree that the true emotions, true vision, true creativity, that's for us. And spirituality comes in. Spirituality comes in. And that's us. And we have to bring that into the world and maintain control over machines.
Muchísimas gracias, muy interesante. Para
Thank
terminar,
you
un
so
aplauso,
much.
sí, por favor.
And a round of applause, please.
Nos vamos
a pensar
So
un rato.
we are going to think,
Pero solo
to
quería
reflect
una
for
cosa
a
muy
while.
rápida, los dos.
A very, very
¿Sois
last
optimistas
fast thing.
respecto al futuro?
Are
Es
you
decir, hablabas de
optimistic
20
about
hace 20 años,
the
dentro de
future?
50 años, ¿sois
In
optimistas?
50 years, are you optimistic?
I'm a big fan of Bakhtin, who said that the future will always remain open. That is the nature of the future. So I'm definitely optimistic about its openness. Here we go. We agree.
Yes.
Finally.
We agree. Okay, both of you agree. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marina, ¿tú? Sí, un segundo. Dejo, Marina.
Okay.